And Amy Julian Castro is back. Remember him? He was a presidential candidate once upon a time in a bygone era. Former HUD secretary, writing an op-ed for CNN.com. Of course he was. Responding to the controversy surrounding the
Which controversy?
CEO of Goya Foods,
Oh,
Robert
come on.
Unanue, who said nice things about President Trump, called him a builder, said Americans are truly blessed to have him as president. Uh, that spawned a call for a boycott of Goya Foods, led by AOC, among others, the usual suspects.
And what happened? More people bought Goya. So that was good. I know I went out and bought some garbanzo beans and black kidney beans.
And Mr. Unanue would not bend the knee, would not apologize, basically told people to go pound sand. Julian Castro, the lesson CEOs should learn from Goya's big fumble. Big fumble. What Mr. Unanue doesn't seem to appreciate is that his words have consequences.
Oh, thank you,
yeah,
Julian Castro.
such an important
This is
observation.
yeah, he's the twin. He's got a twin brother, and he looks like an alien.
They give cover to Trump's bigotry and prop up a man who seems determined to make life harder for people of color in this country. That's why prominent Latino leaders, including AOC and Lin-Manuel Miranda, are encouraging customers to reconsider purchasing Goya products.
Not Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Lin-Manuel Miranda to you, but yes. And Ruben Navarrete also weighed in on this, saying this isn't cancel culture, the calls to boycott Goya, the demands for an apology. This isn't cancel culture. The Goya CEO is just a moron. Mexicans and Mexican Americans are a proud people, says Ruben Navarrete Jr., and many of us take extreme offense at being treated as a prop by Trump. So much so that if you visit the White House, step into the Rose Garden, stand in the podium and praise Trump, we'll come after you, especially if you're Latino and got rich off the backs of Mexican customers. Huh. Yeah. Really interesting observation. Take extreme offense at being treated as a prop by Trump. Is there a particular movement that plays mascot politics better than and more relentlessly than any individual politician on the planet? The entire identitarian movement that undergirds the Democrat Socialist Party of 2020 is mascot politics. We just had an example in Chicago of Lori Lightfoot enlisting a black cowboy to be our census cowboy. I mean, literal mascot.
Yeah.
A volunteer census cowboy to, I don't know, gallop around the city, dodging bullets and encouraging people to fill out their census forms.
Any wards that is having low turnout for census, there's an ice cream competition, Dan, that Mayor Lightfoot set up. I'm not kidding you. And so Census Cowboy goes out and signs people up to do the census, and whatever ward really steps up, they get an ice cream party.
Yeah, so the infantilization that's associated with mascot politics. It'd be interesting to have that conversation with Castro or Navarrete, where they think that is predominant. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Gerard Baker. He is editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. Gerard Baker, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Amy. Pleasure to be with you.
So you wrote a piece that tackled the cancel culture a bit, and also from a perspective of an immigrant to this country, which is always interesting to hear from immigrants to this country. People have some broader perspective and an outsider's view on this to some extent that is really interesting, because oftentimes we find immigrants to America are the greatest proponents of America, and those who have enjoyed all the benefits from birth are less enthusiastic about the country. It's very interesting. But sort of the general question, is the cancel culture real, or are these, flare-ups like with the Goya CEO, with a professor at Princeton here and a professor somewhere else, and some other person of profile suffering some career setback because of their political views? Are these just one-offs that are being overblown by conservatives, or is this a real purge that's going on, Soviet style, that we should be concerned about?
It's real. It is, and you talk to anybody on any of these campuses, and or in any of these media organizations, or as we're seeing increasingly in corporations, by the way, especially in the big tech firms that dominate so much of our lives now. But as you're saying, even in companies, a company like Goya, which you wouldn't think would be a politically controversial. Wouldn't be producing politically controversial topics. It's real, and for every one of these people who are being cancelled or being publicly shamed. There are, and I've heard this directly from people at colleges and in media, there are dozens who are too afraid even to speak up. There's this remarkable example we just had in the last week of this professor at Princeton who took issue to the letter that was sent by many of the faculty at Princeton calling for the most radical changes in the way Princeton University operates by, for example, giving, creating committees like Soviets, like they used to have in the Soviet Union, where people would review other people's work. This professor has now been public. He opposed that and said this was a terrible idea, wrong, and would restrict freedom of speech. He's now being denounced by his colleagues. He's been denounced by the head of the university. There are all these very high-profile cases, and for every one of those high-profile cases, there are so many more where people are just, and again, it applies not just to universities, not just to media companies, not just to the big tech companies, but to so many people in so many walks of life in this country that they are afraid now to say anything. And by the way, we're not talking about saying racist things. Of course, nobody approves of anybody standing up and saying racist things. We are saying anybody who challenges the prevailing orthodoxies of largely of the Democratic Party, and particularly right now, Black Lives Matter and their allies. Anybody who challenges any of that is publicly shamed and denounced, and so there is so much reluctance everywhere now for anybody to speak out. It is very, very real, and it's very threatening. And the point I make in the column, Dan, just to quickly wrap up, is that this is going on when we have a Republican president. Republicans control half of Congress at least. And imagine what it will be like when if and when Democrats control the government too. This is a genuinely scary moment, I think, for this country. And as you said, I'm an immigrant here. I love this country. I came to this country with my family. My children are all American citizens now. They were born here. There's so much about this country to admire, and this is really a dangerous moment because this is a time when all of the values that made this country great are being steadily trashed.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your article too, it's not just comments made now. Corporate executives have been fired for opinions that they wrote 3 decades ago. And could you give us any example of that?
Yeah, I mean, there was the guy at I think it was Boeing, wasn't it, who wrote 30 odd years ago, back in the 1980s, about women in the military, about women being bad. And it is worth remembering women in combat positions in the military. That was government. That was the policy of the country. That was the universally agreed upon position of Democrats and Republicans alike. It changed. We then had, in the 1990s, it changed, and people have come to a different view on that now. And that may well be the right thing to do. Many people now accept that. But this is something that he wrote more than 30 years ago, which, again, was not even controversial back then, but is now being picked up and being denounced, and he was actually fired because of that article that he written 30 years ago. People, these positions, arguments about these things change. I mean, take gay marriage, a perfectly good example. Barack Obama, as late as 2010, was opposing gay marriage. The Democratic president of the United States opposed it, said he didn't support it. 10 years later, gay marriage is the law across most of the country. Are people going to go back and look at what people said 15 years ago about gay marriage or 20 years ago about gay marriage and say this is outrageous and they need to be denounced and they need to be fired for it? I mean, this is very real, and again, it's very, very dangerous.
There's an interesting an example of this on college campus. Walter Block is a professor of economics at Loyola University in New Orleans, and he's a libertarian, so he's a bit of a provocateur, which is fine. I thought that's what you're supposed to do in places where you're pursuing intellectual development. I used to think that. I don't know, but he has written books like Defending the Indefensible, where he argues for legalization of prostitution and other such things that are controversial. He is now under fire on campus because students are suggesting that he believes that slavery is wrong for the wrong reasons. because it goes against libertarianism, not because it's morally
Yeah.
wrong. In fact, Bloch's position, he repudiates slavery on both grounds, libertarianism and because it's morally wrong. He favors reparations, but not from all whites to all blacks. I mean, that's how, his actual positions. But he did this thought experiment that has now generated a call for his termination. Um, Suppose my son has a dread disease. The cure costs $10 million, which I don't have. You do, so we make a deal. You give me the funds. I come to your farm to harvest your crops or to your home to give you an economics lesson. If you don't like the way I perform these duties, you may physically assault or kill me. Is this a legitimate contract in a free society? And he argues, yes, we both benefit. It's a mutually agreed upon exchange. You can argue yes or no. It's an interesting thought experiment. But the point is, you can't have thought experiments on college campuses. You can't make people think they're just supposed to say, here is the acceptable position. Now repeat after me. That's the new sort of norm
Yeah.
in education from pre-K through post-secondary.
Yeah, and it's exactly the point that universities, schools are supposed to be places where people can exercise inquiry, right? So we can understand the way in which the world works and the way in which it should work. They should be able to hypothesize, develop theories, challenge those theories. That's the only way, by the way, that you really actually expose bad ideas is by examining them. We don't get, as you say, in philosophy, the fundamental questions of life, economics, social affairs. We only get to understand the way in which policies work, the way in which society works, if we do allow people to examine and to challenge ideas. Some of them may seem crazy ideas, by the way, and it's good that we can expose those ideas as being crazy. But that, of course, is the way you do it. If you suppress those ideas, if you say you're not even allowed to examine that idea, whether it be, what sounds like an extreme idea, some of those kind of, the thought experiments, if you like, that you've just given us examples of. If you suppress them, the first thing that happens is you don't actually get any real ability to understand the way the world works, right? Because it's only by examining and challenging ideas like that you understand the way the world works. But secondly, what you do is you push those ideas underneath. They don't go away, and actually they become the surest way for bad ideas to get wider circulation ultimately is for you to try to suppress them. And that, again, that's the other worrying thing here. And one more thing I'll say is that what's particularly worrying about this assault on speech is that it's not that these people say, and I mentioned this in the column, it's not that they challenge these ideas that people come up with by saying, that's a bad idea, it won't work, it's wrong, it will lead to bad policy outcomes and we shouldn't do it. The language that's now used by the left on all of these things is, you can't say that because it hurts me, because it harms me, because it threatens me, because it makes me feel unsafe. When the New York Times, when they had to get rid of when they essentially fired their opinion editor for running that piece by Tom Cotton in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protest about calling for the mobilization of the military if necessary, and that all the journalists at the New York Times objected. They objected not by saying it's a bad idea, it's wrong, it's crazy, it won't work. They objected, all of them, by saying it puts my life in danger. The problem with that argument, the problem with that approach to argument is it rules out, it delegitimizes the alternative argument, because if you say to someone, you can't say that because you're threatening me, because it harms me, because it might kill me, then that literally is the kind of speech that typically we don't allow people to say. So it's
Exactly.
and it applies across the board now in policies. You hear Democrats talking about Republican health policies. Republican health policies are going to kill people. Republicans' taxation policies are going to kill people. They don't disagree. They don't challenge the ideas on the principle, on the merits. They simply refuse to engage with those ideas and say, you can't say them because you're going to hurt people. And that, again, that's basically fascistic.
Well, that's it. That's and that's exactly what they want to do. I mean, those who understand what they're doing, there's a lot of automatons just going along, but make speech violence, and then you can eliminate speech. Absolutely. And it's interesting, too, because there is this alternative, and conservatives should do a better job of promoting their worldview, their approach to these things. For example, just in the area of academia, I mean, I find Peter Singer, who's a bioethics professor at Princeton University, detestable. his promotion of infanticide is despicable to me. It's disgusting. It's also weak philosophy. But nobody like me is running around saying Peter Singer can't be employed by Princeton. We should boycott him. We should end his career. We should do this. We should do that. We should take what Peter Singer is saying and we should engage and we should dismantle it intellectually so that people understand that his position is the morally and intellectually feeble one. That's the approach that we could take in the society that people who truly believe in free minds and free markets will take. And there's just not enough juxtaposition of sort of the two modalities from which we choose.
Right, exactly. And again, it's a very good point that there are lots of ideas we disagree with, lots of ideas we find, as you say, abhorrent, and ones that there are lots of people on, we certainly know that these days, there are people on campuses and elsewhere who hold extreme views that many people would find abhorrent. But again, it's the right way to tackle those views is to expose them, is to examine them and to say, look, here's what the actual implications of this are. Here's what it would mean. Here's the way this idea, this proposal would work, and then to explain so that most people can say, we don't like the consequences of that idea. The way not to tackle that is to say these are views you're not allowed to express. I mean, that runs so counter again to everything that's been achieved. I mean, we wouldn't, by the way, this is going back to the kind of, you can talk about Maoism and we can talk about the Soviet Union and the Bolsheviks. It's kind of also going back to, I'm afraid, to sort of the Middle Ages where, people were not allowed to express opinions that were hostile to the religious authority of the time. You were literally, in many cases, people were actually executed for that. That is not the way in which this country developed and became great. This country came out of Enlightenment, out of the Enlightenment of the 18th century, when we had a process of rational inquiry where people did challenge. And by the way, it was part of the revolution here was that people were willing to challenge the prevailing authority as laid down by the government, and they were willing to stand up to it and to challenge it. And that's the way. That was the spirit in which this country was built and what made this country so successful. And the idea that we would just actually sort of now turn it into some kind of pale imitation of the Soviet Union, which didn't end well, by barring people from holding opinions that are not in line with the prevailing authority of the day, is just crazy and will just end crazy and deeply, deeply, deeply damaging and harmful to the country and something. People have really got to stand up to this. And as I say, I don't want to sound alarmist, but this is taking place at a time when supposedly, at least, Republicans who don't support these ideas are controlling much of the government. Imagine what's going to happen if that happens, when that's no longer the case.
He is Gerard Baker. He is editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. Gerard Baker, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
Signature Bank